Our stocks are dangerously low. If we keep this up and we have to suddenly confront poverty along with the rest of the world is already headed down the tubes. If you go to Europe, the prices of gas are 3-4 times what they were. In Asia, it's apoplectic. Southeast Asia, it doesn't matter where you go, Southwest Asia, the situation is dire from a purely financial economic standpoint. And we don't exactly have a very strong financial position given our national sovereign debt. And we seem to be debasing our currency at the moment. And the petrodollar, very simply, is we buy your oil. You live in the Arabian Peninsula. We buy your oil. The dollars that you get from us, you reinvest in our treasuries. And by reinvesting it in our treasuries, we're able to continue an economic expansion. Well, that's over. It's done. And how rich are we going to remain without the petrodollar? And I think the answer to that is not terribly good. So I think we've effectively lost this. Can Israel survive several more days or weeks of devastating destruction from missile attack? What are we going to do? How long can we continue to keep this up at a point in time where our missile stocks are dropping off precipitously? Are we going to start trying to drop dumb bombs? In other words, not precision guided, which are fine if all you want to do is rubble people's cities. When there is no strategy in war, there is no end to the war. We never had a strategy. I think the problem in Washington was that, first of all, it's a combination of ignorance and arrogance. We did not have a high opinion of Iran and its military capabilities. We didn't understand Iran. Iran is Persia. It's been around for 2,700 years. This is a large civilizational state. And this state is not going to roll over for Israel or us. And remember that all the demands that, not just for us, but for the whole world. So I don't think the GCC has much flexibility. And remember, first it was the British for over 100 years that promised and delivered on protection for these little oil kingdoms, including Saudi Arabia. We agreed privately in the 1930s to protect the Saudi oil resources. Now, what we found out is that we can't do that. We can't shoot down the missiles. We can't bring the Iranians, so to say, to heel. We couldn't even defeat the Houthis. Does anybody remember the Houthis? I mean, this tribe of backward Arabs living in the mountains in southern Yemen that everybody dismissed out of hand as incapable. They shut down the Red Sea. They shut down commerce to the Suez Canal. Why did we think if we could not stop that and defeat those people, how could we possibly take on a nation of 93? Because anytime you try to shoot down an incoming missile, you're inclined to shoot at least 2 missiles at it.
What Colonel Douglas MacGregor just laid out for you is a stark, almost unbelievable assessment of the US-Iran conflict and its global economic impact. According to the decorated combat veteran and former senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense, the economic toll of this conflict is already catastrophic, not just for the immediate region, but for the entire world. He paints a picture of a military unwinnable for the US, where shooting down a $20,000 drone costs $2 million a pop, and where an enormous missile arsenal of 45,000 stands ready. MacGregor, drawing on his deep Washington insights and verified reports, believes this conflict is forcing global powers to align against US hegemony, accelerating the end of the petrodollar. The army he left in 2004 was a fraction of the size he served in during Desert Storm, and he's hearing from insiders that the situation is dire. But what happens when the world's reserve currency faces its biggest challenge yet? And how will a global economic reset impact your portfolio?
Well, that's a losing proposition. Just run the math. You're going to lose that battle. Inevitably, you're going to run out of missiles before the enemy who's throwing missiles at you does. And I think that's what's happened in the Gulf. Now, can we make up for that shortfall? Yes, but it's going to take time. China, for instance, builds 1,000 missile or rocket motors in a day. Think about that. We produce 100 missiles of all types in a month. So I think privately, behind the scenes, the president's being told, our stocks are dangerously low. If we keep this up and we have to suddenly confront the Chinese, the Russians, or any near peer, we're in trouble. I mean, don't you remember during the Ukraine war, especially during the first 2 years, every other week or so, someone would come on and say, the Russians are running out of ammunition. Mistake. We did that in Vietnam. We threw large quantities of aircraft and bombs at the enemy and finally said, nope, that's not going to work. We'll have to go in on the ground. The army that I left back in 2004 was a fraction of the size of the army I'd served in 1990 and 91 when we fought Desert Storm. We put 300,000 troops on the ground. We had almost 800,000 men on active duty in the army. Now, if we go back and look at what we did in 1990 and tried to do it today, first of all, we don't have the troops. And secondly, the satellite-based intelligence and reconnaissance capabilities would reveal where we are immediately. And thanks to Iran's heavy investment in precision-guided missiles, they would destroy us in the port or on the ground wherever we landed. That needs to be understood. Warfare has changed. I don't see any hope. If you're an Israeli right now and you support Mr. Netanyahu, this is your chance, because fight Iran. We're going to war with Iran. And we're going to war because the Israelis don't want them to have nuclear weapons, and we agree with that. And because the Israelis don't want them to have their ballistic missile arsenal, and we agree with that. And the Israelis don't want Iran to cooperate with anyone in the region against them, and we agree with that. He never built the case. And if he had tried to do that, most Americans would have said, what? Why are we going to war again? Because this is what Israel wants? He's never articulated the criticality of fighting to the American people. So what do you do? Well, he didn't have to go to Congress because Congress is on the hook for the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby controls the House. It controls the Senate. It also obviously controls Donald Trump and the White House. And people are saying, oh, that's not true. You don't control Donald Trump. Well, I've got news for you. If he didn't control Donald Trump, he wouldn't have gone to war. And for the people here, power. This is a mega power on every conceivable level, another continental power that cannot be conquered. So, no, I don't think the idea was to go to war in order to harm China. People, though, in Washington are dumb enough to say, well, this is kind of an unanticipated benefit. We're harming China, really. So that means that the rare earths the Chinese control, which are so vital to our defense industries and so many other things in private and in public life, doesn't have an impact because the Chinese can essentially cut us off. And what do we do then when we want to reproduce missiles, whether it's Patriot or strike missiles or aircraft or anything else? So I think it's a very dumb idea at this point to think that somehow or another this is going to harm China. China is even more resilient than Iran. The Chinese are only going to sit quietly for so long until they finally say the Americans are nuts. They're gradually aligning with Iran against us. So what's he do? He should get out. He should stay on humanitarian grounds. I owe it to the rest of the world. This is a global problem. We're not going to solve it with military power. But I don't see him doing that. There's nobody out there to rescue us. So I think one of two things has to happen. If President Trump cannot find it in his heart to come to terms with the reality that this is something he can't win, and if he's not willing to make any concessions and he wants to drag this out month after month after month, which is a distinct possibility that we should not exclude, even if he begins to launch more strikes, those strikes are not going to produce the effect that he wants. So that means that even after he launches more strikes, he's still stuck with the same essential problem. War is a very stupid idea. War is too destructive. It damages commercial activity. It destroys living standards. Nobody wants anything to do. Out of trouble. The possibility that we don't have to do that this entire war could have been avoided, that the Israelis are going to have to learn to live as a normal state inside the Middle East. Those things don't occur to him, and that's the problem. So it's back to your initial question. Where do we go next? I find it very hard to believe that he will not, quote unquote, in his mind, unleash hell in a last-ditch attempt to try and bring Iran to heel. It's not going to work. And I would not exclude the possibility that the Iranians demonstrate some capabilities that we have not seen yet. I think that'll happen.
Colonel MacGregor's warning about the US-Israel-Iran conflict is stark. A war that's unwinnable, economically catastrophic, and pushing global powers like China and Russia to align against the US. He's not alone in seeing this. The financial implications are immense, especially when you consider the cost of modern warfare missiles that cost $2 million a pop to shoot down a $20,000 drone. That's a losing proposition by any measure. What happens when the buyer of last resort stops showing up? The colonel's insights, drawn from his time in the military and his current contacts in Washington, paint a picture of a nation recklessly printing money to fund conflicts that drain its resources and diminish its standing. This isn't just about geopolitics, it's about your money, your future, and the stability of the global financial system. The end of the petrodollar is a real possibility here, and that changes everything. The world is watching as these events unfold, and the biggest bubble in human history could be popping right before our eyes. So the real question is, do you want to be the person who understood this early, or the one who explains it to their accountant later?